All right, we're back with our New Zealand Aviation podcast. Been a couple of weeks since the last episode, and you know who joins us from Brisbane? I take it you're in Brisbane still, Martin, are you?
I am in Brisbane, yes.
It sounds like you are.
Yes, I'm outside, actually. I'm walking around outside doing this show.
We'll hear the galahs or whatever making noises in the background again, will we?
There's all sorts of birds going on in the background.
Yes,
Yeah.
Always exotic bird sounds seem to come through in your contribution if you're in Australia. Maybe we'll hear them again in this episode. Anyway, oh my golly, we got to start with the 737 MAX. This has turned into, well, it's a nightmare. Let's face it, this is a nightmare for Boeing. It's a nightmare for airlines with big orders. Where do you want to pick it up from?
What I find interesting is the chief pilot and the head of the Southwest Airlines Pilots Association coming out and questioning Southwest's commitment to a single aircraft type. I found that very interesting. The chief pilot of American Airlines came out and said something very similar, although they do run a mixed fleet. But he said maybe our reliance on two suppliers is a bit of a problem. Then another interesting point is I watched a very interesting video showing the thrust line on the MAX compared to the new generation, and that's very, very, very revealing. Those engines, I never really realized this, but the fan cowl on the MAX is actually above the wing now, and so to do that, they've had to push the engines up to 2 feet further forward. The engines are significantly heavier, and the whole reason behind this MCAS thing, and possibly the reason they didn't publicize it as much, was an artificial system to make the MAX handle, as far as they hoped, exactly the same as the 800, so that they didn't have to introduce a lot of difference training. And I don't know if you remember right back at the beginning, we said this is probably due to training costs.
Yep.
They wanted to be able to compete with Airbus on the training costs, because in the Neo, the difference between the A320 CEO and the Neo, it's negligible. There's very little involved. Just jump in the new plane and fly, basically.
Yeah, that's right.
Those are interesting, especially when Southwest Airlines says that they've got 710 and they were due to replace their whole fleet. And another interesting point is that Boeing actually, now of course they said this in a case where they were trying to defend their turf against the Bombardier C300. They said that they did have a competing plane in the 7X, and the 7X was required because the 8X and 9X are not suitable for hot and high airports. And then they went on to mention Denver as a hot and high airport. And of course, these two accidents both happened, one in a very hot environment and the other one in a hot and high environment. I'm just going to recap everything I've read over the last couple of weeks. It looks like the Air Ethiopia pilot followed procedure, turned off the MCAS, did everything he could, but of course by that stage it was all too late. But another thing that Southwest have said, and engineers within Boeing, is that Boeing, in rushing the MAX into service and just trying to keep it as a slightly more economical 800, they missed so many opportunities to refresh what is a 1967 design, right? At the guts of it, it's the core systems are still quite old. And, you know, even the fancy glass cockpit on the 8 MAX and the 9 MAX and the 7 MAX, it's basically he just replicates the previous generation cockpit on bigger screens. There's nothing new added.
Well, they marketed that cockpit as sort of like 787-ish, didn't they, or esque? It had they. In fact, I think this is what we're going to discover, and this is where they could be held criminally liable. I think, is that there was a gamble taken. Boeing aren't dumb; they've been in this business for a long time. They knew what they were trying to do, and they knew that there were shortcuts. But it kind of feels like they were closing their eyes and hoping that everything would be all right. And, you know, the point you made about Southwest is very significant. They built that airline on 737s. It was launched on the 737. That was the platform, always has been. So when an airline that's been so solidly behind a make for so long is saying that, you know that there are issues. So I'm wondering how far legally this is going to go for Boeing. There could be 300 or so cases of corporate manslaughter coming up. It's possible.
Yeah, it is quite possible, and that's a scary thought. But you know, if they've done wrong, they deserve to be punished.
But fancy being that desperate, because I saw, been obviously trying to digest as much as possible, saw quite a good analysis in the last day or so, and the Airbus releasing their plans for the Neo back when they did it, that literally freaked out Boeing. It freaked them out.
It freaked them out at the highest level. There's a very interesting New York Times article about exactly that, because up until that point, Boeing had always just thought people bought Airbuses to keep a bit of competition in the market. The senior management at Boeing never really thought there was that much of a difference in the planes, although apparently the engineers were saying, guys, we've got to do something because this plane's real good. And the whole family approach, A320, A330, at that stage 340, 350, the similarities and everything, they said the engineers were saying, guys, you've got to watch this. Boeing was very complacent, and we'll talk a little bit about that, or I'll talk a little bit about that later. And it was only when the American Airlines CEO phoned Boeing and said, we're thinking of going with Airbus on this one, that Boeing rushed out, committed to the MAX, committed to a whole lot of things, and they were apparently gutted when American Airlines split the order.
But they kind of, is lying too strong a word? As I understand it, and maybe you can make a comment about this, that even the MAX simulators didn't have this MCAS feature replicated in their simulation because, someone didn't think it was necessary, or they didn't want to tell? I mean, how could you explain that?
The whole mantra was similarity, 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 and the whole certification process was based around grandfathering it in. They did not want to expose any major changes to that design. And apparently the changes are more fundamental than we know.
And where was the FAA on this? Because, again, that's going to spill over to them, isn't it? This is going to spill over to FAA, no doubt.
That's what happens when you deregulate your inspection agencies, and it's on a similar vein, but obviously not that critical. They've done the same thing. I presume they've done it in New Zealand, but they've definitely done it in Australia. They've outsourced building inspections for residential housing. And you can shop around now to find, I have heard of people, let's say, that have had a house inspection fail. They've just gone and got another inspector.
It's been happening with car warrants of fitness here in New Zealand by the thousands. The Transport Agency has had to revoke, I think, close to 10,000 warrants of fitness in the last few months, and that's just the start. So where the regulatory authorities come into it, I don't know. The big question is, with, I think, 4,000 orders for the MAX, and that's what happened. They managed to sell a lot, so they must have thought back then, boy, we just dodged a bullet. Aren't we clever? The public, I mentioned this last podcast, the public are well aware of this model now and are probably not very confident with it. Where does that leave the 737 fundamentally? It might be time to say goodbye.
Which is what some Boeing engineers were saying right when the MAX was rolled out. They said, guys, now's the ideal opportunity to take it to the next level and really compete with the A320neo. You need a new plane. But of course, that would have cost an awful lot of money. And the ramifications of this are going to be very interesting when it comes to the 777, because they've done the same thing with the new 777s. It's a new wing, significantly different aerodynamics. It's a much bigger plane, but they're still grandfathering it in on the old 737, 777, 200, 300 classic type certificate. And I think that's going to be looked at very, very closely. Already there's rumors that the 777 certification is going to be significantly delayed.
Well, they're talking, I think American Airlines is talking, August?
The American Airlines and Southwest have cancelled all MAX flights until August. Yes, so they're going to miss the most of the peak travel season. So I think it's American Airlines. They've got a relatively small fleet. They cancelled. I think it was quite an astounding number. It's like 160 flights a day have now been cancelled because they just don't have the capacity.
Surely if you're an airline with a big order that hasn't been fulfilled yet and you're waiting for your MAX, you can go back to Boeing now and saying, well, we're looking at Airbus now. They've come back and said, it's X amount of time to get an order through them. We're only prepared to pay maybe just a bit over half of what we're prepared to pay before. Where does that leave Boeing?
Well, at least Boeing, yes, that's going to happen. I think airlines that were on the edge, I think in the local area here, well, the relatively local area, I wouldn't be surprised if Virgin cancelled their order for 40 planes because there was already talk about them not needing them anyway because they've got a very young fleet. And the guy who just got overlooked for the CEO position, he was very vocal and wanted to cancel those Maxes, and I wouldn't be surprised if this gives them the reason. I don't know that Airbus can ramp up capacity that quickly to cover any of that at this point. However, I think there's an opportunity there for the CS500. It'll take a while to get it into service, but they could probably have it up and running in 2 to 3 years. The drawings are all done. The base engineering's all been done. I reckon this will give a window of opportunity to give Airbus again to have another market advantage. Is that they're going to replace the A318 and the A319 with the upgraded C series as soon as they can. I reckon they're working on that now.
And
get it out there.
Again, Boeing, I remember talking about this in earlier podcasts at the time, Boeing had the opportunity to purchase the CS production line. And that would have actually helped them avoid this situation, yet they, for whatever reason, I can't remember the reason at the time, but Airbus have snapped it up, given it an Airbus name. Oh my God, they have made some, some serious blunders, It
probably wouldn't have helped them this much with this particular problem, but it would have given them access to a whole bunch of ready-made engineering for the eventual replacement. And what's also apparently a factor in that, though, is they didn't want the 737 to be shown up by the C series, because if you're flying in a Boeing product that you've just bought in from another company, all right, and let's say they called it the Boeing, I don't know, 727, whatever.
Yeah.
It's obviously a much newer and a much more modern product than what their narrow-body flagship's meant to be, which is the 8 MAX, which is, and I've said this before, and a lot of people don't agree with me, but the 8 MAX, the MAX series, is basically lipstick on not a pig, but it's you're trying to make a silk purse out of a sour's ear, it's a good plane, but it's an old plane.
Well, basically, it's the 737-400 fuselage with a new wing and engines, isn't it?
And some dodgy software.
Yeah, but can you believe? This is what I struggle with. That software turned out to be so unreliable. What sort of flight testing did they do? What sort of envelope pushing did they do? They obviously never got to that, did they?
Well, apparently the version that was certified, that was grandfathered in somehow as even the name, Maneuvering Characteristic Augmentation System. There's no hint in that title that it's actually going to take control of the plane.
Is that a marketing invention by the marketing department?
Well, it's meant to downplay the role of the system. It's just an augmentation system. It's just to help you a bit. So there's no hint in that name that it's actually going to take control of the plane.
Well, that's why you worry that there was sort of nefarious intent. That's like a willfully covering label for something to disguise its real, true meaning.
Well, it's all about. I don't think it's malicious. I just think it's, guys, tone it down a bit because we want to use the existing type certification. So yes, it's an important system, but we'll just call it the MCAS. We'll put it at the back of the manual somewhere. Try to ignore it. But even worse than that, now people are saying, some of the test engineers are saying, it appears that Boeing has upped the force applied by the MCAS system post having it checked. So the system was checked, although there's some question as to the qualifications of the people who certified it. But subsequent to that certification, Boeing made changes to it and have upped the forces. So what happened in the Air Ethiopia thing? Apparently the procedure is turn it off on the pedestal, disable it, and then manually crank the control wheels, the trim wheels, to try and get control back in the plane. But by that stage, the forces were so high they couldn't. And according to the training, what you should then do is turn MCAS back on, and it should readjust back to a place where you can manually. It takes the loads off, and you can. But of course, with a single faulty angle of attack sensor, the moment they turn the MCAS back on, it got the bad signal again and sent them into the ground.
Oh gosh, it's terrible to think of, and to have only again one instrument feeding.
Yes.
Data into such a crucial system again. Was no one thinking? I mean, redundancy in aviation is an old concept.
Yes, and it's a lot more complicated than just adding a second sensor or even a third sensor. You've got to have rate change analysis and all sorts of analytical algorithms going on, making sure where do they disagree, which one's disagreeing with what, et cetera, et cetera. So 2 probably wouldn't have been enough. There would have been a lot of software. It would have been at least 2 sensors and possibly a solid-state gravitometer or something to check the results of are we going up, are we going down? One indicator saying this, the other indicator saying that. What's the third one saying? And it has to be a different type of sensor. But of course, that would have been a major software change. That would have probably required recertification. It wouldn't have been an augmentation system. It would have been a new control system.
Right.
So we only want augmentation systems, right?
Well, I remember you saying early on in this that you were pondering whether this was some sort of once over lightly compared to Airbus, sort of fly-by-wire input, right?
Yeah. To mimic what a modern system can do without having to build a modern system.
Yeah. And it all comes down to the 737 doesn't have enough ground clearance. It's always been the problem. That's been what the problem, and that's why they freaked out over the Neo, because anyone looking instantly at the A320 airframe knew that anything new or bigger would fit under there without any problem, and that's what freaked them out. That's what put them into almost a checkmate situation if they hadn't come up with this.
Yes. Again, that's what the engineers said. If you're going to spend your money on anything, keep the rest of the plane, increase the size of the undercarriage. But of course, that's a major system change, would have required a high level of certification, more testing. As it is, they've marginally increased the main undercarriage leg, which is why the plane sits at an angle when it's on the ground. It sits a bit nose low.
Oh, no, it's nose high. You can see.
The other way.
The nose wheel is lifting it just a bit further to maintain that, just at the forward parts of the nacelles, that ground clearance. Yeah.
They've extended the one they can, because if they had to extend the main undercarriage, it's wing box changes, it's wheel well changes, it's inner wing changes. So it's smug complacency leads to self-delusion and problems.
And like we've been saying, Airbus keeping very quiet. It's not in their interest to say anything right now, because it would look like they were, I suppose, leveraging the situation when the competitor's down. But there must be a great opportunity. There must be some order cancellations, significant order cancellations from this. Of course, the Chinese will play it for all they can, because I suppose in a way it could be political. Though you're talking about Airbus's ability to fill the gap if there is an exodus of orders from Boeing. Remember, they have production facilities in the US and in China as well as in Europe.
So I'm sure they'll do what they can, but they can't, and they're going to wait and see how it plays out. I think China is particularly interesting because I reckon they will use this as a strategic opportunity to promote their own companies and try and produce a world competitive. Take that Comac plane that they're making, which looks suspiciously like an A320, and run with that.
Yeah, boy, what a horrible situation. And the terrible thing is that many people paid with their lives for this.
Yeah.
This, nothing more than just looking for easy corporate gain, really.
Well, that's what happens when when an engineering company starts getting managed by financial people. That's always what happens. It's inevitable that it happens. Unfortunately, it's hit Boeing this time. But you got to ask yourself. I mean, look at the 787. The 787, it was rushed into service using a technology that the only reason they chose it, they thought it was going to be significantly cheaper and allowed them to build more planes, all in the name of competition. That plane reasonably successful, but you notice people aren't ordering many 787s anymore.
No,
it's not because it's a bad plane. They just don't need them.
But also, as you pointed out last time, that suffers from the same constraints. It has short legs. Any new those new generation geared turbofans, which have big fans, they have to have big fans. Will they fit under there? And if not, well, they're in the same sort of snookered position as they've become with the 737. Though, in saying that, they've certainly made their money out of that model. It's been incredibly successful. I think over or close to 8,000 have come off the line. Continuous production since '67. Not too bad.
But it comes down to a marketing position that you take. Now, the industry I work in, no one's life depends on it. You might get your postcard late or an invoice or something. Might be a bit late. But the machines are big, complicated, very expensive, inherently upgradable, right? You can upgrade them. You can you can upgrade the mechanical platform and put the latest gear on them. It's really not much of a problem. But the lengths companies go to encourage you to scrap them and buy their latest machine, the only time they'll ever offer an upgrade is just after you've awarded the replacement project to somebody else. Yeah. And then they're all over you with suddenly it's all possible.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's not an unsuccessful strategy. I've been on projects where they've said, okay, we'll still go ahead with our replacement order, but we will, because we've got a bit of a capacity issue, we will upgrade some of our existing platforms. The only country that has managed to get significantly, or that has managed to get upgrades is it's America, because they've got 8,000 machines. They've got like more than the rest of the world combined. And when the USPS says we're going to upgrade these machines, either with you or without you, the suppliers play ball.
Right.
Because the USPS has said, listen, we're going to upgrade 2,500 machines. We don't really care what it costs, because it's going to be cheaper than buying new ones. And they'll go to a completely different company and get them to do the upgrade.
Right.
But everywhere else, we'll tie ourselves in knots trying to get people to scrap them. And I think Boeing's a similar thing. No, we won't make these planes as upgradable as we could. We won't make it easy to do neo models. We'd rather you threw it away and bought a new one, because we make more money.
Yeah. And that's clearly what they're hoping to do with the 737. They want to be replacing the earlier or older, 8 Max and 8 NG. And I see they're starting to make a bit of a deal about the 7 Max, and you can see why they've invented that, because the 8 and the 9 couldn't get off, I guess reliably is what they're saying, or would encounter problems at airports like Denver and anything over about a mile high, or wherever it's hot, or both. So they know that, and they've got customers. United's, one of its major hubs in the US is Denver.
Yeah, which is why the A321's been so successful in the States, because it doesn't suffer from those limitations. I mean, they used to say that about the 900, the previous version. They said takeoff was it only really worked in America because they've got enormously long runways. People were surprised when Lion Air in Indonesia took all those 900s a few years back, because people were saying, geez, getting into some of those island airports with a 9 on a hot and humid day, it's going to be interesting, because the takeoff performance just isn't fantastic, because you can't rotate.
Yeah, gosh. Now, what's the bet? I said this last time. I think it's even more likely now that they'll change the name of that aircraft. Once they've done the work on the software, they'll come out with a new name, like the 737 Ultimate or something like that. They'll try and bury the Max.
The Super Safe.
It's super safe.
Did you see Trump's tweet?
No, what did he say?
Exactly that. He said exactly that. They're going to have to rebrand.
Oh, okay. I didn't realise that, but it's logical.
And you said it last time as well, so you heard it here first, listeners.
All right,
both of you.
Okay, so we don't have the Max here. I think Fiji Airways were the only one. They had 2 on the way. They've grounded that. Obviously, I think at least a 737-8 out of a Miami somewhere, a company out of Miami to cover. Yeah. So it really hasn't affected us. I bet Air New Zealand are pleased they didn't go with that aircraft.
I reckon the Chinese are going to insist on recertification.
Wow.
I reckon, and they have every right to. They're going to say, guys, we're not convinced.
Well, they'll use it as a political weapon too, because they're right in the middle of trade talks, and Trump's sort of, pushing them hard. So that's and I think they had quite a few hundred on order, for whatever the government body that buys the planes and then allocates them to airlines. They had a big order. So
and we're not satisfied with a Band-Aid. We want to see it, even if it's just a partial recertification. We want a list of everything that's new, and we want that all to be recertified, and then we want the complete package to go through a sort of a certification light, just to make sure it all acts as expected. Interestingly, Boeing's test flying the 9 MAX. They've done, I don't know, last time I heard, or 8 MAX, sorry. Last time I heard, they've done like 96 test flights, and I can pretty much guarantee they've replicated the problem now.
Yeah.
And they're probably thinking, oh my God.
Yeah, wow. Yeah, they should have known about that theoretically anyway, but boy, a lot of people are going to be feeling bad in Boeing, especially the ones who can say "I told you so" now. That's a pretty tough situation to be in. All right, well, we'll watch that space. And as it relates to Boeing, Martin, you mentioned it just before as we were talking, the new 777 has been, sort of rolled out. This MAX problem has severely affected the launch of this aircraft. And I wonder if that's causing Boeing a problem as well. They can't really crow about anything right now. And they've got a product that people have been waiting a long time to see. Airlines are going to start receiving soon. It'll be in production now, and yet they can't make a noise about it. They can't make a rah-rah.
Well, as I alluded to earlier, I expect that program will be coming under a lot of scrutiny in terms of in-house certification. Yeah. Because it's a new plane. It's a new wing, new system, new everything on the old fuselage. So,
what's the bet that it's got an MCAS system?
It might well do, but it won't be a separate system, because the beauty of the 777, like most modern airplanes, fly-by-wire, they can just adjust it.
Yeah, okay, but it does take the gloss off that, and again, that could be an exploitable situation for Airbus. What's their next major? Well, I see, speaking of Airbus, that there is some interest now from American carriers in that extended range version of the A321neo as the 757 replacement. So that's another nightmare come true for Boeing, potentially. Yes.
And I also expect, regardless of any problems they may or may not have with the 777, I expect the FAA is going to be all over it like a rash.
Yeah, well, they've got their reputation to protect now, too. I don't think they're going to come out of this unscathed, the FAA.
No.
And it'll probably turn out that there are a lot of very close, conflicted, possibly, relationships between Boeing corporate and the FAA. We'll see.
Well, it's all come about, Boeing's become a sort of a national champion, and whatever you do, don't slow Boeing down, because they earn us a lot of money. Yeah. And we gain a lot of prestige through Boeing products being successful throughout the world.
Yeah.
See, Airbus, the British Airways A350-1000s just entered testing.
Oh, wow. Okay, yeah.
Yeah, that's coming along soon. And, of course, they were a big 777. I mean, apparently, I read that in the aviation press this week. One of the reasons Airbus pulled the plug on the A380 is because the order they were expecting from British Airways for more A380s didn't happen. They went with the 777.
Right. Okay. Well, the BA liveries have been fantastic, I've got to say, to see. I think that was it the Negus, the last one?
Yeah. Nice,
is flying now. So it's great to see those retro liveries. Plenty of pictures and footage out there. People really love that sort of stuff, don't they? They go nuts.
Yes. I mean, I think that BOAC 747 just looks awesome, eh?
Yeah, it's the real deal. Yeah.
We said that last time, but I mean, that's one reason to keep 747s knocking around, so you can paint them up in old liveries.
I see that Air New Zealand are quashing some rumours that were around earlier in the month, that an aviation person, Aviation New Zealand Chief Executive John Nicholson, and I'm quoting here from a stuff story, said he had heard from a reliable source that Air New Zealand was looking at increasing the number of jet routes in the country. They're looking at some other routes that would support jet flights, he said, which he goes on to say, I think it would be warmly welcome by the travelling public, but Air New Zealand is saying no current plans to introduce jets on routes serviced by turboprop aircraft. But this person, I'm quoting, John Nicholson, not so sure. I mean, what would they use if they did that?
CS300.
Yeah.
So definitely. My son went in one, a Swiss Air one, Budapest to Zurich recently, and he said, you know, he's not that interested in airplanes, but he knew it was a new plane, and he sort of kept some memories back for me, I think, and he said you really noticed. He said it was fantastic. Big windows, quiet, roomy. Yeah.
Would they be prepared to spend the money right now, though, Air New Zealand, I wonder? And there's talk of Air New Zealand and Mount Cook Airlines being made into one operation. Yeah.
Well, it's you know, if you're going to spend money, spend it on a nice new plane, not on chef's uniform for the business class service person. I think that's the right name for them now. I have no idea what you meant to call them. I would have said, in my pre-PC days, I would have said steward, but that's not on.
No, you're not allowed to say that now.
No, but the person what serves the food, when I was sitting in the plane and saw that person putting on a chef's uniform to serve me airline food, I thought, you know what, they've lost the plot.
They've been reading too many of their own friends who write food columns for magazines and newspapers that are only read by foodies.
Yes.
And not the members of the travelling public who have, as it's turned out, deserted, a proportion of them, the national carrier because they've been too expensive and they're paying the price. And I wonder whose head will roll there. We'll find out. But we'll talk about national carriers. I know you're itching to talk about national carriers, Martin, and the relevance of them, but maybe we'll save that one up.
I wouldn't say talk, or I'd say rant a bit.
Well, hey, this is just an organised rant. This program, anyway, probably.
Pretty much, yeah.
If you want to give it a description. Now, there are airlines out there having all sorts of problems. I see Zoom is having problems. Their new aircraft are being parked. They're in the crap, let's say. Jet Airways now, big carrier. They had a couple of dozen, I think, big international aircraft. They're down to 14 domestic aircraft in India now. Looks like the bottom's going to fall out of that operation, and God knows how many people have had their travel plans screwed up there. And I think that's partially owned by Etihad, isn't it? There's an interest.
Yeah.
And of course, Etihad are in the total crap. So not so good. Good for some airlines, not so good for others. And you wonder also. With the, I see there's talk of Asiania in Korea having problems, and it seems now that unless you're a very large country, you can't sustain any more than one legacy so-called carrier. And if you've got low-cost carriers operating there now, watch out. One of you is going to go down.
Yeah. I mean, the Etihad thing can be traced all the way back to their policy, an odd policy. Is buying minority stakes in secondary and even third-level airlines.
Losing airlines.
Yeah, how's that going to work for you? And I've said this on the program before, that's exactly what happened with Swiss Air. They got some hotshot ex-US CEO. He came in and they did exactly the same thing. They went and invested in a whole lot of failing airlines to extend their reach, and they basically ended up trying to finance all these guys to keep them in business, and that ended up belonging to Lufthansa.
Yeah, well, they're saying that as far as Jet Airways is concerned, reading a post here out of Prune website, someone's saying here, as good as the service is, if they don't have the support of the Indian government, they will probably be gone by next week, talking about Jet Airways. So
Yeah, and Indian government is never going to support competition to Air India.
Yeah, they really look after Air India, no matter how much of a basket case it sort of seems to be.
Yeah, they do.
Too much political entanglement there, one would imagine.
Well, it's an extension of the government, isn't it? So,
yeah,
you got to keep people employed.
National carriers again.
Yeah. Man, it's cost the taxpayers a lot of money. National carriers have, mate.
Have you read about this aircraft they're calling the Tesla of flight? It's built by an American company, Colorado-based By Aerospace, and it's the E-Flyer 2. It looks like one of those sort of really hot sort of home-builts like a Landcare, something like that. But it's electric. And Norwegian Aviation Group, I'm reading a story here, which has been posted again in Prune, has ordered 60 of the aircraft. I reckon this is just a little thin end bit of the wedge that's going to happen. We're going to find out so much more about electric aircraft in the
for training purposes. If you don't need to fly for longer than 45 minutes, take off, fly around a bit, land a bit. You can actually spend your 40 hours or whatever it is learning how to fly the plane than learning about spark retardant advance and mixture control, because that's really, you speak to someone who's done their PPL, as you have, and you spend a lot of time learning what not to do that actually have nothing to do with flying the plane. Yeah,
like carb heat and mixture control and all those sorts of things, all gone with this.
Yes, I think BYE, it's part of that. It's connected to that Chinese electric car company that's selling thousands of electric cars in China every week.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
I know Siemens is also, they're starting an electric air racing league pretty soon. And there's a number of big names are getting into that. And I was reading, and of course I've forgotten his name, but there's like this lithium-ion battery guru. He's like the physicist / chemist who's made a lot of the, maybe not discoveries, but a lot of the improvements to lithium-ion batteries over the years. And he's actually came out and said, if you can make the battery structural, the shape of an aircraft wing is actually ideal for a big lithium battery, because you can get lots and lots of layers of the various components over a big area. And if you can get over apparently charging, that's hard. But he says in terms of capacity and the technology that's now available, if they were to commit to it, you could have a lot of power stored in an aircraft wing, and he reckons enough to power regional jets of some size, like an A320 on shorter trips. And he's, and there was a graph in the article, I think it was in the Economist magazine, saying most trips are short anyway, hour and 40 minutes. He said one thing that would make a huge difference would be and this is where it starts getting sort of maybe going off the rails a bit, and rails is a good word, some sort of catapult system to get them up to takeoff speed. He said that would save so much power.
And that could be done.
Yeah, have an electromagnetic catapult down the end of the runway, running down the middle of the runway, and you shoot it into the air, and you've saved a significant percentage of the overall energy required for the journey, just accelerating the thing up to 150 knots. Wow,
because one's getting the impression now amongst the climate alarmists, and that's exactly what I'd call them, because the people are saying we're going to all be gone in 12 years if we don't do something. But one is sensing a backlash now towards anything aviation. Anyone who travels is maybe up for criticism. And that, I think one of the Democratic contenders, what's her name, the star Congresswoman from New York.
Yeah, another one.
Ocasio-Cortez, I think her name is. Really leading this alarmist charge. People are believing it, and one of the items mentioned in terms of global warming was global aviation. So, with the incredibly PC'd response of everybody these days, particularly large corporations, things like airlines, who need to signal their virtue like nothing on earth, there will be a very strong push for alternative, less impacting, I guess, fuel and propulsion systems for aviation to avoid that sort of criticism.
Yes, and I would say the way these things are, the criticism mounts, stuff happens, blah, blah, blah. But when the adoption finally happens, it's not because people are doing it to virtue signal. It's not because people are doing it to make a good point. When the masses adopt something, it's because it's better. And I think we're seeing that with electric cars. Most people who have driven electric cars, and a few people I've spoken to who own electric cars, they might, part of their decision process was, oh, yes, this is a really good thing for the planet. But overwhelmingly, they say, yeah, but it's actually a better car.
Yeah, well, that's what, in the end, drives human choices. Though you get the impression, and I wonder if it'll happen with electric cars, and really personal forms of transport. I mean, I used to be a smoker, and you used to be a smoker, and plenty of people are vaping now. It seems to be a hell of a lot less impactful on the health. It certainly doesn't have the same passive smoke that regular smoking produced. Yet there's still a hatred of it because it looks like smoking. So people lose the plot, and even if something looks like something, it's not acceptable. And I wonder if personal transportation will become unacceptable, whatever the propulsion or energy form is.
I think we're too selfish. I think you'll always have a vociferous minority that will complain about everything.
Yeah, but they've got the media, though.
And I think that's what will change. It's like CNN, you know. What I always think, I don't watch CNN ever on purpose, but sometimes you're sitting in a
trapped at the airport
room or you're in a hotel room in China or somewhere, and you flick on CNN and you see their guest on their panel is the guy who ran the previous show half an hour ago. And you say, what? You're interviewing each other now? What the hell's wrong with you?
Well, that's what they're doing. And CNN's taken a 40% drop in ratings since Trump was found not to have colluded with the Russians. So that just shows you where how fickle the whole thing is. But watch out for the continued demonization of anything that puts carbon into the air. Though I'm sure those going to their next sustainable, environmentally friendly conference will probably fly, right? They'll probably fly.
Yes.
They won't go on a sailing ship or row.
And they won't stay in dormitories type accommodation where they can save energy and water and everything. They'll all be in the Sheraton.
Oh, of course.
You know, in terms of I've said this before, I say it a lot. The adoption of new technology, and this my favorite saying is, the Stone Age didn't end because you ran out of stone.
Exactly.
And the oil age will end because something better comes along. And at the moment, it's probably electric cars. Although it is quite funny when you listen to energy executives, oil companies that and say, we don't believe that solar power or battery power is any good. We should have hydrogen. And you say, well, guys, that's just a transparent attempt for you to keep your distribution network
your
running.
Pipes and your tanks.
Yeah, and what about the electricity required to produce hydrogen? Wouldn't it just be better putting it off in a battery? It's the same with petrol. You know, to produce a litre of petrol apparently uses 2,000 watts of power.
Yeah, there you go.
So it's 2 kilowatts to produce a litre of petrol.
Yeah, so it's a zero-sum game in the end. You can't make that fly. It just has no.
I'm sitting at I'm
logic to
staying with a friend over here. He's got 37 solar panels on his roof. It's a 12 kilowatt system. He hasn't had a power bill in the last year.
Well, there you go. And that's going to be replicated. How the power company's going to deal with that? I still haven't heard how they're going to deal with that.
They're lobbying furiously to try and keep something in the game, because it's going so quickly. I mean, I'm standing in a suburb of Brisbane now, down 17 Miles Rock Road, Oxley, and I cannot see a house that doesn't have solar panels on its roof, and that's happened in the last, I'd say, 3 years. There's not a house around me and it's not just a few. The smallest system I can see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, they've got eight panels.
Wow,
That's probably a little 2.5 kilowatt, 5 kilowatt system. Yeah, so it's really hitting here. I mean, they're exceeding their renewable energy targets massively, and now the numbers are coming out. I read recently that they reckon they could produce all the energy residential Australia requires and transport requires by 2030.
That's not far away. What about, I saw a program recently about Convair's. They converted a B-36 back in the 50s to be nuclear powered. Do you remember that?
Yes,
and they had a special cabin. And of course, it was back in the grubby days of nuclear energy. I believe now the latest reactors, even at small scale, cannot melt down, and the fuel that they use is the waste from other earlier generation reactors. So it might even be possible to put a couple of very small nuclear reactors safely in a big aircraft these days and supply electricity that way. You just never know.
I just think it's been so demonized, rightly or wrongly, nuclear power, that I don't think. You never know, though. I mean, if it's a choice between flying and not flying. Well,
that's the thing, and no emissions, and basically perfectly safe. But I take your point. The demonization of it has set it back. But everywhere you look at modern nuclear power, it's really the saviour. It really is. There's nothing else that can do it on the scale that
Australia could have been emissions free in terms of power generation 30 years ago. I mean, it's a big geologically stable continent. They could have put in 3 big nuclear reactors and that would have been the end of it. But of course, you wouldn't have had a myriad power companies making a killing.
Well, that's right, exactly.
It's not about the best way to produce power. It's about the most profitable way for the people involved through so. Because don't forget, everything comes down to following the money and self-interest.
Yeah. Let's talk space quickly. Boy, isn't it amazing to watch the Falcon Heavy lift off?
Yeah.
And come back. Yeah, and my God.
Those two, all 3 landed, but unfortunately they lost the middle booster, hey?
Oh, I thought that landed on the...
It did, but then it subsequently fell off the barge.
Oh, I didn't see that bit. Oh, my golly. All right, okay.
Yeah, like it fell off the barge yesterday. There was 1,000 kilometres. That was the furthest away they'd ever recovered it. So it was 1,000 kilometres downrange, and yesterday, due to heavy seas, it fell off the barge. They
have to have some way of clamping it down stronger, eh?
Yeah. Or maybe, I wonder whether they'll. I'd be very interested to see whether this happens, whether they can extend its downrange without increasing the speed too much and sort of land it in Africa.
Right. Okay. But let's say that the system works. It works really well. It got.
It's 2 for 2.
Yeah, and if it wasn't for the big seas, I mean, they landed it on there. It was there for a day, and watching those two come down together, and don't the crowds go just wild at that? My golly!
They say every time a booster lands back, there's a surge in Tesla orders.
Okay, yeah, I can imagine. Yeah.
Because you order them online and people say, oh, my God, these guys are awesome. I'll go and buy myself a $60,000 car, which is a thought that often crosses my mind, but I just never actually push that buy button.
Okay, well, maybe next time, Martin. And when you've got it, I want to drive.
There's a small issue of 60,000.
Come on, for you, no problem. And also the Stratolifter finally lifted off. What an awesome machine that thing is. My God.
Yeah, that is interesting. It must feel very strange as a pilot when you bank one way or the other because, you're I think you're like 60 feet away from you're at least 30 feet away from the axis, the turn axis. So you'll be going up quite high and quite low. That's quite funny.
It looks like it might have a 747 cockpit window layout on the little.
It does, doesn't it? Yes.
Control cabin.
It's a Bitzer.
And also they, I think, 747 engines, Pratt & Whitney engines, 6 of them, and you can see the size of it. It's going to be able to take quite large...
250 tons.
Well, there you go. Wow.
That's what it'll lift. But that SpaceX thing, you can imagine the CEOs of the competing rocket companies going, geez, every time that thing lands properly.
Yeah.
They'd be going, oh, my God. Because it just makes them look like idiots.
And I think they can lift with that thing 95-ton payload, can't they? 95.
Yeah.
And to not to low orbit, to about 250, 300 miles. So.
And the thing about that is that's the same length as the 777 fuselage coming down, eh?
Backwards. Isn't it wonderful to watch the camera feed? They come in. Boy, those things come in at a rate, don't they? Jeez.
They just fall out the sky. They fall. I mean, the sonic booms are not far above the landing pad.
Right. Jeez.
It's they are smashing it down. And I mean, if those rockets fail to fire, that thing would be about a meter high.
Yeah. Well, we'll probably get to see one of those at some point. I mean,
no, it's just amazing. The competing companies are they've got to hate that. Because everyone was saying not longer, it's impossible, you'll never do it. They're saying the same thing about the Tesla battery. Back to the cars, I watched a video where they dismantled batteries from 3 electric cars, a Nissan Leaf, a BMW i3, and a Tesla. And again, they had another sort of physicist, chemist guy there, and he was saying, 5 years ago I was saying this wasn't possible. And yet this is the 3rd battery pack I've disassembled. These are the 3rd cells that I've tested. And he says, I can't believe how good this battery is. And he says the competition's they're nowhere.
Wow.
Yeah, wow, really? What have they done?
Yeah.
And he says, they've just been really good and really committed, and they've made hard choices and done it hard.
Yeah, well, like you say, every time they do something successfully, it's a great ad for anything Elon Musk is doing or has done or will be doing. Incredible.
Yeah, we need more people like that, don't we?
Yeah. Well, there still is detractors out there. I noticed when he smoked some dope and drunk some whiskey on Joe Rogan's podcast, people were saying that he shouldn't be in charge of these programs because he's so irresponsible and sending a bad look to people. I thought, gosh, what have you got to do in this world? You know?
Yeah. But I think he does that as a bit of a wind-up as well.
Yeah, well,
I'm 100% sure he does.
Yeah, well, I mean, those appearances on that podcast were in the millions, so plenty of people were interested in hearing what he had to say. So,
no, you know, more people like that. A lot more people like that. Yeah. Jeff Bezos, I hope his rocket works out well as well.
Well, that's right. Having them all having a go is great. I mean, one thing's for sure, we're obviously not too far away from going back to the moon.
Yeah.
And that can't happen soon enough. But anyway, is there anything else in aviation we need to talk about in this podcast, do you think?
No. We've been a bit sort of...
Oh, the Lukla accident at Nepal. Did you see that? That little let turboprop. I don't know what happened. Yeah. Did one engine go to full power or something? Because it suddenly lurched and landed on that Squirrel helicopter. My golly.
It was taken off. It veered on takeoff.
Well, they hadn't even rolled.
No. Oh, okay.
Yeah, they hadn't. It only just started to roll. It's like an engine went to full power, or something happened, and suddenly lurched to one side and went off and fell on a helicopter.
You know, unfortunately, it'll be something mundane, like his hand slipped off the throttle levers and he only engaged one throttle. Well,
I didn't realise they're flying those. They're sort of like improved, those little high-wing turboprops, those Czech ones.
Turbolate 410. Apparently very good aircraft.
Yeah, because they had the German aircraft in there, didn't they?
The Dornier, yeah.
Dornier. I haven't been to that part of the world, but my sister went up to Everest quite a while ago and landed at that airport, and she was saying it was just incredible. It's an uphill landing, downhill takeoff, 1,600-foot runway.
It's probably quite easy to find the airport because it's just littered with wrecks of Pilatus, Turbo Porters, and Dorniers.
I mean, we shouldn't laugh, but yeah, it was watching the footage of that it was kind of bizarre to see what had happened there. Certainly, the flying conditions were okay. It looked like a normal day up there, and they hadn't even started really their takeoff roll. So I guess we'll find out what happened there. But as always, there's a camera rolling, and you always get the footage these days. It's amazing.
Yeah.
All right.
No, it's funny. The aviation news has been eclipsed by the Boeing shenanigans, hasn't it?
Yeah, that's right.
Jeez.
All right, well, let's watch that space, and I guess by next podcast we'll know if Jet Airways have gone under or not. There'll be... Oh, now, what does Boeing do when they're producing? They've said they're going to lower the max production rate, but they're up around 50 a month, I believe. I mean, there's going to be those copies coming up, and where are they going to go? I mean, they're just going to keep piling up if they're not flying anywhere.
It's 42 planes on top of the 42 planes a month on top of the 300 and something they've produced. So if that plane's grounded for 3 months, it's going to be 140 odd planes hanging around. Well, they've only just cut the production rate, so it's going to be more than that.
Well, they're going to have to be able to fly them out of Renton because there won't be enough room. Surely they'll have to fly them to Moses Lake or something, so they'll have to be able to at least fly them one flight.
There's also all the planes in pre-delivery that were already in Renton. Right, so there's probably a fair few there now, and of course, when they turn the taps back on, they don't all fly out of there that day.
No.
It's a couple of weeks to get them. You got to do the test flight.
Yeah.
You got to. So yeah, they are saying it's going to affect them going forward for up to a year. Should everything be all right, but I reckon it's going to be. I wouldn't be surprised if it's longer, or maybe the Americans will okay it, and the rest of the world will say no. We want to check all the numbers first. I think that's going to happen, and I also think I'd be very interested locally whether Virgin keep their order. Or suddenly report a profit because Boeing said, listen, mate, just take them. Please just take them.
No, don't pay us anything or whatever for the time being.
Yeah.
All right, good to catch up again, and hopefully we'll have another guest. We're still trying to get line up the ducks with our Captain Canada guy. Very busy, just finding a day is difficult. It hasn't gone away. Just bear with. But in the meantime, I should really quickly tell you about Bring Our Birds Home. We've launched the Bring Our Birds Home dedicated website. We've built it and launched it, Martin, and that's got everything in one place. And very shortly, the big intensive fundraising effort will begin. It's just a matter of waiting for the right combination of everything to be ready so we can go. But it's great to have the website. I'll send you a link, Martin. and you can have a look.
Approach Boeing, Paul. They need some good PR.
Well, yeah, help us with our old 737 maybe. But
yeah, and you put it on display, you put a sign under it, this one didn't crash.
Yeah, a non-MAX.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, our one's number 66 off the line, so that's how early we're going back. Yeah.
Maybe edit all that out about the non-crash.
No. Well, so things are going well, and hopefully we'll have be able to lay out the whole strategy very shortly in front of all our followers who have been great with their commitment and their loyalty to us. So that's where that is, but great to have that website up and running, and that address is being sent out far and wide to many people, rest assured. So that's the update on Bring Our Birds Home. Okay, Martin, we'll talk again in the next week and a half, maybe 2 weeks.
Yes, we will.
So in the meantime, it's goodbye from me in Auckland, New Zealand, and
goodbye from me from a squally Brisbane.
There you go. Okay, we'll talk soon.
See you later.